Riding down 285, summer nights, cruising, life's ills plague my mind, but I got dreams I'm pursuing. First class flights, you can catch me chilling in Abu Dhabi, but it's crazy how this started as a vision and a hobby. Look, you could always find some peace in what you do, so don't you fool around. Another day, some other rules. I don't get anything off it. Round and round we go. Round and round we show some pain and all we hold some This for the brothers up north, getting full of that Jack Mac, loaded Lux Force. We got a youngin' that back smack, there's hunger at his core. You know the demons attack that, but he's heard it all before. So them haters he laughs at. Tunnel vision on this journey, how I keeps it going. The car speeds on, whether rain, hail, sleet, or snowing. I've been growing, searching throughout this life, striking fear into their hearts every time I touch this mind. You could always find some peace in what you do, so don't you fool around. Another day, some other rules. I don't get anything off it. Round and round we go. Round and round we show some pain and all we hold some Summer nights in the Batmobile, cruising, oozing the confidence of somebody that's been through it, and bruising the ego of these young bucks that claim they do it. Now prove it and show me that the dream is for you, kid. You could always find some peace in what you do, so don't you fool around. Another day, some other rules. I don't get anything off it. Round and round we go. Round and round we show some pain and all we hold some rules.
Itamanyolu bena kuitunganyina kundigila luko kuitunganyi koitunganyi musoni tunganyi manamiri la saya mama amme kasira molu yanina ambe torola ila saya sababu musoni tunganyi manamire ila sama mama hambe kasira molu torola ala manamifo sigatura alamana mifo ulebeke masamana kiti kokoro ulebekele jontise nuyo neba nena alamayinena nena neba alamayinena alamana mifa ulebekele masala mana kiti kokuro ulebekele jontise goche nalate ambe kalimania baba yeriba ambe kalimania seidu fatu ambe kalimania isa ambe kalimania dirisa mama ambe kalimania alamana mifo uleketo alamana kiti kokoro uleketo de jontise goche nalate jontise goche nalate jontise
no one ever asked me how I've been, how I've felt, what I need. I'm stuck in stillness, in the feeling of realness. Got numb fingers, I really can't feel this. Got numb fingers, I really don't feel this. The light shows me I'll come around. The night owes me a couple pounds. I run a grind, I'm right lonely. I settle down, I'm right lonely. I am the beholder, cause I ain't ever told you. I get a rise from everything I've ever tried. In stillness I hide, in stillness I hide, hide, hide. In stillness I hide. When I'm alone, I get high, get grown. In stillness I hide, in stillness I hide, hide, hide. In stillness I hide, hide, hide. In stillness I hide. In stillness I hide.
Mic test, mic test. Okay, y'all can hear me. Well, it ain't none of y'all fucking business what I was doing. Nah, but what up, y'all? Welcome to the stream and shit. As you can get from the title and shit, what's going on? Today I want to stream an audio book of mine about Project MK Ultra. I personally haven't listened to it yet, but I have read up on a lot about Project MK Ultra and other mind control experiments that was done by our government. And so I figured, because I know the average person is not gonna read shit. Y'all don't read. Let's just be honest. Folks don't read. On real. So I figured a good way to get a lot of this information out here to y'all, information that's documented, would be to just buy the audio book and stream it to you guys. So today won't be the only day that I'll stream it, because I want to try to reach as many folks as I can, because I'm not gonna bullshit with y'all. What I'm doing here on this platform, I'm not looking for all the likes, I'm not looking for all the follows, and I'm looking for my particular kind of people. And my particular kind of people, they understand first and foremost that information is everything. And so I want to make sure that I can get information out to as many people as I possibly can. So that's what we're going to be doing here for the near future, as well as a whole lot of other things. But yeah, so a few of the projects that we're going to go over are Project MK Ultra. I also have I want to get out to you guys Chaos, which Candace Owens had recommended, and it covers a little bit of MK Ultra, but it mostly covers a lot that had to do with Charles Manson and Helter Skelter and that whole situation that I know a lot of us who weren't alive back in those days, we might be misinformed about a lot of details and shit. So, without further ado, but I do got to let y'all know, I might not participate as much in this stream because I have my 8-month-old son with me, and he's very spoiled. He loves his daddy. Yeah, unlike most of the stereotypes that go on, black fathers do exist. All black fathers don't abandon their kids and all that other horse shit that y'all pass around on the internet and shit that I get so tired of. But I don't ever even really waste my breath to address that shit because, I like to focus on shit that I control for the most part. And shit, I give my opinion here and there, but for the most part, even my opinion is just a trolling opinion and shit. For the most part, at the end of the day, once I turn that camera off, once I turn this stream off, I don't give a fuck. I can't afford to give a fuck. I'm a father and a husband. I got to focus on what goes on in here, and I would advise each and every individual out there to do the same. Don't ever forget where your priorities lie, first and foremost, and your priorities lie within the household that you reside in. Your priorities lie within the community that you live in and shit. Although I get on here and I might do a lot of talk about the black experience and the black community because I'm a black man and I grew up in the black community, but that was my past. I live in an all white, all redneck, ultra conservative town because that's where I'm most comfortable at. I'm very conservative, and in this generation, a large majority of black folks, because they raised by single mothers who don't really understand the political scheme as well as they believe they do. So a lot of liberalism, excuse me, I got to take my vitamin D. I got to take my medication. My words are slurring a little bit. But a lot of liberalism is nested and it festers in the black community today. So that's just not the place for me. Not to mention black on black crime, violence, poverty, everything else, that so many of my people, we trying to escape from, but I feel that we've gotten a little bit too comfortable in. But that's neither here and there. I'm not here to talk about the black community or the white community or anybody community. Today, we just going to listen to the facts. We're going to listen to the details so that we can be better prepared in our discussions moving forward. So without further ado, I give to you Project MK Ultra, the history of the CIA's controversial human experimentation program that I'm sure a lot of individuals had no idea about. And the only thing I can say is that I hope that even if you don't enjoy the stream, and even if you don't enjoy the audiobook, I hope that you leave this podcast experiment, because that's what we'll call it today. We're going to call it a podcast today, even though it's just me live streaming. I hope that you, at the very least, get informed from this podcast experience today. So without further ado, Project MK Ultra, American Rob, y'all enjoy yourselves. And I appreciate you guys being here with me today. Because I want to try to get this video, I want to try to get this information out to as many people as possible. Please, please, please. And I'm saying please, please, please hit that like button. Please hit that share button. Please, let's get this information to as many people as we can. I'm one of them people. I am so fucking tired of not being able to have rational conversations with uninformed people. I'm tired of trying to have real conversations with people who think that the information I'm giving them is just conspiracy theory. So how about we all do our due diligence today? For all I care, you can scratch my name off. I don't give a fuck how you do it. Just please give people a chance to have this information. So let's get started. Project MK Ultra by Charles River Editors. Narrated by Colin Fluxman. I'm a coxman. But no, let me stop playing. Here we go, y'all. Project MK Ultra. I'm going to go switch to a better view. I can't see the monitor from here because I'm blind as shit. So I got to go to my other desk to do that. And I'm going to mute my mic because I'm going to be dealing with my kid a lot. I got to piss. Yeah, I'm trying to tell him. Give me 1 minute, little guy.
Introduction. The target of this brain warfare is the minds of men, both on a
I get it.
and on an individual
I hear you.
basis.
I hear you
Its
loud
aim
and
is
clear.
to condition the mind so that it no longer reacts on a free will or rational basis, but responds to impulses implanted. The Soviets are now using brain perversion techniques as one of their main weapons in preempting the Cold War. Some of these techniques are so subtle and so abhorrent to our way of life that we have recoiled from facing up to them. CIA Director Allen Dulles, 1953. The medical trials at Nuremberg in 1947 deeply impressed upon the world that experimentation with unknowing human subjects is morally and legally unacceptable. The United States Military Tribunal established the Nuremberg Code as a standard against which to judge German scientists who experimented with human subjects. In defiance of this principle, military intelligence officials began surreptitiously testing chemical and biological materials, including LSD. U.S. Supreme Court Justice William Brennan. Since the early days of human warfare, which may date back to the Stone Age, combatants have sought to gain an advantage through the acquisition of secret information. With the growth of technology, a parallel advantage was sought through the application of numerous types of torture. In the 19th century, the concept of manipulation was added to military tactics in an attempt to influence the minds of assassins, double agents, and world leaders alike to act against their natures. Given the incredible advances in technology brought about by global warfare, the years immediately after World War II would bring about the most extensive formal study of the many procedures by which this effect could be accomplished. In America, studies drawn from enemy experts from the recent war introduced mass testing into the general population and further diminished the oversight through sanctioned government research, particularly the military. Under threat from world powers, real or imagined, the greatest abuse of psychology ever known in the West would be led by a legion of medical officials riding a wave of paranoia. Stopping it was unthinkably unpatriotic, and keeping its abuses hidden was a matter of cooperation at every level of government. The push to develop torture and manipulation techniques was driven by an exaggerated fear propagated by the American military and national press of mind control. American officials believed that Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean communists had reached the holy grail of mental warfare, and that the United States must follow suit or be left behind. In time, the transformation of brainwashing from a system of coercive propaganda to a secret program of human enslavement reflected cultural demands placed on the idea by the Korean War and was preceded by interest in electromagnetics. To the embarrassment of many Americans, 5,000 of the 7,200 American POWs in North Korea signed confessions and petitions to end the war. Most recanted their actions once free, but many did not, and some refused to return to their homeland. In the end, the peak of the American experimental regimen on unwitting humans grew to vast proportions and splintered into a myriad of disciplines by the mid-20th century. The program came to be known as MK Ultra after several early incarnations, and to this day, the name has become synonymous with controversy, even as the program's experiments and results remain relatively mysterious. Predecessors. In the 1940s, the US government spent $2 million on electronics with the aim of creating a ray apparatus to kill unshielded humans at 5 to 10 miles. The claim made at that time was that an auto engine could be stopped at a distance by tuned waves, a ludicrous assertion that never truly had scientific support to back it up. However, as noted by writer Edward Hunter, who later testified before a Senate subcommittee about the phenomenon of false confessions, a man who has been deprived of convictions and standards will accept a quack faith. Ironically, the prototypes of such theories and technological programs in America were bolstered by the importation of scientists from Nazi Germany. After the last shots of World War II were fired, and the process of rebuilding Germany and Europe began, the Western Allies and the Soviet Union each tried to obtain the services of the Third Reich's leading scientists, especially those involved in rocketry, missile technology, and aerospace research. Along with scooping up Nazi personnel, the Combined Intelligence Objective Subcommittee confiscated war-related documents and materials while interrogating scientists at German research facilities seized by the Allies. The Ossenberg List, a catalogue of scientists and engineers who had worked for the Third Reich, was discovered in a toilet at Bonn University. Overnight, men with doctorates were liberated from KP duty. Masters of Science were recalled from orderly service. Mathematicians were hauled out of bakeries, and precision mechanics ceased to be truck drivers. Naturally, this was a delicate affair due to the fact that many of the German scientists were not only active Nazis, but had helped the Nazi war machine terrorize the world. At the same time, by the late war period, the Anglo-American Allies formed a clear picture of the Soviet state. Though forced to ally with the USSR's dictator, Joseph Stalin, the West came to understand Communist Russia represented yet another hungry totalitarian power, and thus a very real threat to an independent Europe. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill realized the menacing character of the Soviets from the Katyn forest massacre of Polish army officers, if not before, while the Americans only gradually shed a naive assumption of continued Russian friendliness after the war. For their part, the Soviets retained ruthless imperial ambitions, which manifested in various ways. They allied with Hitler for a time in 1939 to 1941, planning to divide Eastern Europe between their two expansionist states. They devastated the Ukrainian population with the Holodomor, an engineered genocidal famine which claimed perhaps 3 million victims. The Soviet refusal to evacuate Eastern Europe following the war, instead retaining many formerly democratic countries as vassal states, spoke volumes about their intentions. Both the Western Allies and the Soviets knew of Adolf Hitler's V-2 rocket program, the forerunner of ballistic missiles and the space race. Each recognized the immense strategic value of these technologies and wished to secure their benefits for themselves. As the Soviets contemplated additional expansion following the Great Patriotic War, and the US military came to understand the putative allies of today would emerge as the enemies of tomorrow, the men possessing knowledge of the V-2 rockets and other Third Reich military technology programs became seen as crucial pieces in the incipient standoff between NATO and the Soviet bloc. The result was the American-led Operation Paperclip on the Western Line, which resulted in German scientists putting their expertise at the disposal of the US and other NATO members. Operation Paperclip aimed not only to obtain the benefit of German scientific advances for the United States, but also to deny them to the potentially hostile Soviets. As General Leslie Groves explained, Heisenberg was one of the world's leading physicists, and at the time of the German breakup, he was worth more to us than 10 divisions of Germans. Had he fallen into the Russian hands, he would have proven invaluable to them. The Western approach, however self-interested, typically met with voluntary compliance on the German scientists' parts. In contrast, the Soviet answer to Paperclip, Operation Osor-Vyakim, used the implied threat of imprisonment, torture, and death, the characteristic tools of Stalinist Russia, to coerce assistance from German scientists and engineers following the war. These men yielded rich dividends to the Soviet state in terms of achieving at least temporary technical parity with the USSR's Western rivals. Today, Operation Paperclip had a profound impact on the Cold War, and American history would be an understatement. The Allies had created a plethora of overlapping missions, forces, plans, lists, and operations to sift Germany for valuable personnel and technology. Though confused, jumbled, and often redundant, no overall rationalizing framework, these numerous initiatives and organizations did their work thoroughly, gleaning incredible quantities of data from the fallen Thousand-Year Reich. The most well-known example of the operation's success is Werner von Braun, who was once a member of a branch of the SS involved in the Holocaust, would become known as the father of rocket science and fascinate the world with visions of winged rockets and space stations as a new Manhattan project, one that NASA would eventually adopt. And in addition to the weaponization of ballistic missiles that progressed throughout the Cold War, von Braun's expertise was used for America's most historic space missions. NASA also had to develop rockets capable of first launching a spacecraft into Earth's orbit and then launching it toward the moon. The Soviets struggled throughout the 1960s to design rockets up to the task, but thanks to von Braun, NASA got it right with the Saturn V rocket, which to this day remains the most powerful launching rocket NASA ever used. An initial group of 1,600 German scientists was imported to improve the American arsenal of rockets, biological and chemical weapons, and to ensure they did not fall into Soviet hands. President Harry Truman sanctioned the operation, but forbade the agency from recruiting Nazi members or active Nazi supporters, so their documents were simply altered to be cleared as American operatives. Under this guise, a group of 34 Nazi scientists was taken to the United States under the leadership of German Dr. Hubertus Strugold and accepted contracts authorized by the American Joint Chiefs of Staff. They were put to work at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio to practice their skills on prisoners, mental patients, ethnic minorities, and what were then called sexual deviants. Among the most controversial Nazi scientists was Dr. Walter Schreiber, who had intentionally infected entire concentration camps with typhus and malaria, and had experimented with injections of phenol in executions. Interrogated and then hired by the Americans, he worked at the Air Force School of Medicine at Randolph Air Force Base. However, when his past activities were revealed, the CIA hastily arranged a visa and a job for him in Argentina in an epidemiological lab. From there, he moved on to Paraguay and eventually West Germany. The predecessors of MKUltra's drug experiments developed over the course of several years and projects, arguably beginning with the US Navy's Project Chatter in 1947. Project Chatter focused on the identification and testing of both natural and synthetic substances for effectiveness in interrogations and for the recruitment of agents. Headed by Charles Savage of the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, both humans and animals were tested. Of primary interest were the drugs anabasine, scopolamine, and mescaline. Project Chatter ended during the Korean War due to its limited progress and the success of other projects. At the height of the Cold War in the late 1950s and early 60s, many Americans worried about the communist menace represented by the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea. And Americans at all levels of society believed the communist countries were studying and perfecting methods of mind control. In Korea, mind control efforts were practiced on prisoners of war, and Western militaries were alarmed at the number of prisoners who seemed willing to voluntarily turn on their home country. Recent history was discarded, and the urge to suppress individuals' liberty for national security became the norm. It had been the US that devised the Nuremberg Codes that forbade all testing without consent, but at the same time, the government had refused to sign on to it. Now, American officials believed that the country had arrived late to the covert war of torture, spying, and manipulation techniques, and they were in a great rush to catch up. In doing so, a regimen of literally bad science, driven by comprehensible, if inexcusable, human impulses, overtook the constitutional rights of American citizens. It was backed up by government approval, a heady combination of limitless, unaccountable money and little time. Operation Sea Spray became a peripheral installment to the general MK Ultra concept as a biological war experiment fixated on the activities of the Soviet Union. No experiment was considered too outlandish, even mass tests conducted on the population at large. In 1950, a large cloud of allegedly harmless but traceable germs was released over the skies of San Francisco. Sprayed by a naval vessel, two pathogens were employed, the Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii. Spraying was continuous from September the 20th to the 27th, and monitoring equipment in 43 locations around the city led to an estimation that each of the 800,000 residents could have ingested 5,000 particles. The city was chosen for its regular influx of fog, which was thought to disguise the germ cloud. For 6 days, as the bacteria-laden vapor was poured over the city, 11 people were checked into Stanford Hospital, with one eventually dying. Incredibly, Operation Sea Spray may have been less outlandish than an even more covert national effort by the US Army to test secret bacterial agents, with the general population as guinea pigs. Known loosely as Operation Bacterium, various cities across the country were used as an open-air lab, including New York City, Key West, Panama City, and various locations in Alaska and Pennsylvania. Some of the tests were performed on military bases, while others took place in airports, turnpikes, bus stations, and subways. Light bulbs were filled with the pathogens and dropped onto subway platforms. Airports were sprayed by covert agents walking through the corridors with briefcases spewing the bacteria. In the end, biological weaponry was judged to be the superior agent to chemical. The Operation Bacterium report concluded, ounce for ounce, biological weapons are potentially more dangerous than chemical. In 1951, a team of CIA scientists flew to Tokyo and oversaw an operation in which 4 Japanese operatives from the war were taken to a secret location and injected with various depressants and stimulants. The Japanese agents had worked for the infamous Unit 731, responsible for many of the Japanese atrocities committed during the war. They confessed to working for the Soviets as well. After all that could be learned from them had been obtained, the 4 were taken into the harbor, shot, and dumped overboard. However, not all members of Unit 731 were punished. Among the eventual 10,000 scientists smuggled into the US after the war, many were from Unit 731, and their studies were co-opted by the Americans. To facilitate this process, Chinese accounts of Japanese atrocities were dismissed as communist propaganda, so various members of Unit 731 were allowed to go free. Among those brought to the US was Shiro Ishii, Unit 731's head. The Japanese microbiologist was given immunity from prosecution and upon his arrival in the US went to Maryland to offer advice on bioweapons. The beginning. The name MK Ultra served as an intentionally oblique cryptogram sponsored by the CIA's Office of Technical Service. The designation of Ultra had been employed during World War II as a designation of the most secret classification of military projects. Some sources claim that MK was a reference to the German words Mensch Control. The use of propaganda to turn enemy prisoners of war against their home countries was hardly new to the 20th century. But American authorities became so alarmed about POWs during the Korean War that some who returned after vocally denouncing their home country were experimented on to determine why they did so. Around the same time, U.S. Air Force and Marine flyers testified publicly that they had been ordered to drop biological weapons on China and North Korea. The testimony was followed by depositions detailing each flyer's knowledge about who ordered it, where the weapons came from, the training involved, and the secrecy that surrounded the entire operation. The unprecedented degree of compliance and collaboration among POWs and some of the soldiers alarmed the Pentagon and CIA officials. In tandem with these developments, the Cold War rivalry produced numerous breakthrough technologies out of an unhealthy spirit of one-upmanship, and the CIA sought to utilize technology along with a cadre of sleeper agents stationed throughout the world to conduct assassinations. Legislation had banned the U.S. government from participating in assassinations, so it would be done off the books. CIA Director Allen Dulles, arguably the second most powerful man in the country, gave a speech before a gathering of Princeton alumni on April 10, 1953. The Korean War had almost ended, and the New York Times had recently published an article on converted POWs at the hands of communist brainwashers. The agency charged with handling POW confession cases drew stronger by the day, and in his speech, Dulles cited the battle for men's minds and a new form of brain warfare. He described theoretical Soviet techniques as effective but abhorrent and nefarious. Dulles further claimed that experimentation against the will of a subject was antithetical to American values. We in the West are somewhat handicapped in brain warfare because there are few survivors, and we have no human guinea pigs to try these extraordinary techniques. Dulles's speech conveniently omitted the fact that the CIA was already overseeing experiments on human guinea pigs at secret sites in France, Germany, and South Korea. In fact, Dulles had already approved Project MK Ultra, aiming to develop techniques to use against the Soviet bloc and other enemies. To do so, the project aimed to control human behavior with drugs and other psychological manipulations. At the same time, the speech hinted at what was going on behind the scenes. Dulles openly praised the science behind hypnosis as a great American asset. As an example, he offered an anecdote proving the susceptibility of any individual under communist influence by analogizing them to a phonograph playing a disc put on its spindle by an outside genius under which it has no control. The thought of brainwashing both terrified and fascinated the American public in the 1950s, albeit mostly from the standpoint of science fiction. The Manchurian Candidate, authored by Richard Condon, centered around a programmable involuntary assassin agent and was published late in the decade. The Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs was published as a group of espionage vignettes and meant to be read in any order. Both were based on themes of unhinged scientists and vast political conspiracies. On April 13, 1953, 3 days after his Princeton speech, Dulles initiated the kind of program he had just publicly railed against, ordering the agency to develop mind-controlling drugs for deployment against the Soviet bloc. He instructed Sidney Gottlieb, chief of the newly formed Chemical Division of the Technical Services staff to begin the experiments without signing the usual contracts or other written agreements. MK Ultra was born from this order, utilizing very methodologies employed in Japanese and German camps. Over the following 2 decades, this top-secret CIA project would conduct hundreds of clandestine experiments, often without the subject's knowledge. MK Ultra would undergo several name changes that coincided with variety and depth of involvement. On August the 20th, 1953, Operation Bluebird was renamed Operation Artichoke as a nod to New York criminal Ciro Terranova, known as the Artichoke King. Artichoke, like Bluebird, was a rapidly developing offshoot of the eventual MK Ultra program that emphasized the potential of hypnosis and behavior modification as a means of preventing agency employees from providing intelligence to adversaries. The project secretly used many subjects, and it was later labeled an extensive political abuse of psychiatry in North America. The work was systemic and organized and involved many leading psychiatrists and medical schools. The government climate surrounding Bluebird and Artichoke was permissive, supportive, and approving. All communication within the project was accomplished in compartmentalized fashion and on a need-to-know basis. The origins of Bluebird and Artichoke lay in the testimony of Dachau survivors given to American interrogators after their liberation. Atrocities had been performed by some of the Germans arrested at Kransberg Castle, north of Frankfurt, and they were interrogated as part of Operation Dustwind. The most famous was Kurt Blomer. He and many of his colleagues had their pasts wiped clean and were subsequently hired by the Americans before they engaged in a continuation of research started by the Nazis. Samuel Russia was hired as well. He was infamous for putting Russian and Polish POWs in tubs of cold water in concentration camps and meticulously documenting their deaths. Blomer was particularly well known for his experiments with bacteria and viruses, and he was known to have experimented on humans with plague pathogens. 1 year prior to this work, a memo asked the question whether the memory and personality of a subject could be wiped clean in preparation for a new agenda. Viral warfare was included with the caveat that not all viruses have to be lethal. The objectives include those that act as short-term and long-term incapacitating agents. All the while, dissension within the CIA was not tolerated and moral concerns were stamped out. Early work. By 1953, Operation Artichoke was enjoying its best success by emphasizing hypnosis under forced morphine addiction. The fundamental question of the program remained: can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against fundamental laws of nature such as self-preservation? In order to perform assassinations overseas or at home if necessary, an ever-present question pertained to the successful production of the Manchurian Candidate, a hypnotized assassin. The aim was to search out and perfect, quote, the detailed, systematic creation of specific amnesia barriers, new identities, and hypnotically implanted codes and triggers. The CIA was initially divided over who should lead the program. Army Brigadier General Paul F. Gaynor was eventually chosen, and he intentionally selected subjects perceived as weaker and less intelligent. In the 1950s, that meant homosexuals, racial minorities, and military prisoners. In an expansion of Artichoke, isolated locations were established in Europe, Japan, and the Philippines, and within weeks of Dulles' expansion of the program, secure secret prisons were found or built in the Canal Zone, West Germany, and Japan for refining torture techniques and to train Manchurian candidates. In the United States, 80 universities, colleges, and hospitals participated. To qualify as a Manchurian candidate, 4 requirements were listed. The subject had to be recreated consciously, and a new identity had to be firmly implanted. Amnesia barriers had to be created, and the new agent was to be used in simulated or actual operations. In one infamous episode, two 19-year-olds were victims of the creation of multiple personalities, in which they could supposedly pass from a fully wakened state to a deep hypnotically controlled state over the telephone, with no other individuals noticing the change. Another security office employee was hypnotized and given a false identity. She defended the alteration with great vehemence, refusing to say her true name. Individuals were given triggers over the telephone through a code word, passing into a trance state without closing their eyes, and carrying out various instructions. Subjects were fogged with amnesia in faulty and vague memories of the experience. In another instance, a Miss Blank was given a gun despite having already expressed a fear of firearms. She was instructed to use any method available to awaken a second Miss Blank from a deep hypnotic sleep. The subject fired an unloaded gun at the second subject. Once awake, she refused to touch the gun in an absolute denial that she had ever fired the weapon. Contrary to some belief, Artichoke was not merely folded into the larger MK Ultra project, but also continued as an autonomous project for 2 more decades. Artichoke and all corresponding programs were both official and confidential, and it was quietly mentioned between presidents and agency heads, including requests for forgiveness. However, the average Joe did not know about them. With that said, Bluebird and Artichoke were at least administratively rolled into MK Ultra, and a proliferation of sub-projects emerged, eventually totaling nearly 150 projects in all. Sub-project number 23 tested the effects of certain drugs on the central nervous system of terminally ill cancer patients. Sub-project number 87 worked on the purification of extremely high-potency allergies. The ability of delivering various psychochemicals to non-psychotic humans was the emphasis of sub-project number 40. In 1954, Sub-Project 54 initiated operations under the auspices of the U.S. Navy. Codenamed Perfect Concussion, the experiments centered on suboral, below-the-ear frequency blasts to erase memory. The CIA later claimed that the program was never carried out, which critics have charged was merely a common deflection. The elimination of memory was believed to be a necessary first step in the process of finding a Manchurian candidate, and replacing that void with a newly crafted agency agenda was the second, turning seemingly normal men and women into real Manchurian candidates as unwitting assassins. Sub-Project 128 tested an allegedly successful method of rapid hypnotic induction. Sub-Project number 138 worked on creating a body antenna, personal tagging, radiant energy measurement, and remote polygraphs. No shortage of enlisted men existed for candidates. Psych profiles and background materials on every subject were available for all individuals, and each man was desensitized while being strapped into a chair, with head immobilized and eyes clamped open. They were forced to watch violent, true-life splatter flicks until they were totally callous towards scenes of horrible carnage. The entire process generally took a few weeks. The rumor persisted that low-frequency blasts habitually created permanent mental damage to its subjects, but the program steamed ahead through the Office of Naval Research and the CIA participating covertly. Senator Richard Schweiker, Republican from Pennsylvania, who later became President Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Human Health and Services, discussed some of the work done from 1954 to 1955. He explained that when the experimenter found out the CIA was acting as a cover, the project was transferred to MK Ultra 3 years later. Contrary to testimony that Perfect Concussion was never actually carried out, salvaged records indicated that testing was undertaken with a 3-blast test in a lab of 2,500 square feet. The document also mentioned a type of special blackjack device used to administer a high peak impact force with a low initial surface pressure. Some early MK Ultra experiments centered around electroshock therapy, hypnosis, polygraphs, radiation, and a variety of drugs, toxins, and chemicals. Some of the subjects were volunteers, but others were coerced. Many had no idea of their status as experimental subjects, including mentally impaired boys at a state school, American soldiers, and sexual psychopaths from a state hospital. Candidates for assassination training were taken from submarine crews and paratroop companies. Those awarded for bravery were considered excellent material, but murderers were taken from military prisons as well. All were experimented on at the Navy Neuropsychiatric Lab in San Diego and in Naples, Italy, for easy dispersion throughout Europe as part of Operation Gladio. Soon, the Navy began to ensnare prisoners from the general population. Colonel William Bishop trained as an assassin, and his name came up as a benchwarmer after President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. Bishop described the heavy regimen of drugs he was given and claimed that they could take John Doe and get this man to kill George and Jane Smith. He remembers nothing about it. Drugs. Of all the controversial and mysterious episodes associated with MK Ultra, the most notorious is the death of Frank Olson. On November the 23rd, 1953, Olson, a biological warfare researcher who was part of the project, fell to his death out of the window of his room in the Statler Hotel in New York City. Shortly before his death, he had spoken of leaving his job, and he told his wife that he had made a terrible mistake. The night manager who found him on the street below later commented, "In all my years in the hotel business, I never encountered a case where someone got up in the middle of the night, ran across a dark room in his underwear, avoiding two beds, and dove through a closed window with the shade and curtains drawn." Needless to say, Olson's death was surrounded by strange circumstantial evidence. When authorities responded to the scene of Olson's death and went up to his room, they found Robert Lashbrook, who was sharing the room with Olson, sitting on the toilet. Allegedly, Lashbrook claimed he could not remember whether the window was open or closed. He did not leave the room after Olson allegedly jumped, but instead made a phone call to an unidentified source. A phone operator who overheard the call claimed Lashbrook said, "He's gone." An unidentified voice allegedly responded, "Well, that's too bad. That's too bad." Initially, Olson's death was alleged to be suicide, but his family had a second autopsy done, and that one revealed injuries Olson had suffered before his death. This led to the theory that he had actually been assassinated by the CIA. Dr. James E. Stars from Georgetown, in a second autopsy, found a hole in Olson's head that may have been formed by the butt of a gun. Olson's body also lacked cuts and lacerations, indicating that the window was open. A second investigator theorized that Olson resisted and was pitched through the closed window. He noted that the man staying in the room with Olson, Robert Lashbrook, was awake the whole time, and that Olson wasn't cut out for the work he was doing. He was in way over his head, and he knew it at last. As it turned out, 9 days before his death, Olson and several others who were working on MK Ultra were covertly given LSD at a retreat in Maryland. Their drinks were allegedly laced by Lashbrook under the guidance of Sidney Gottlieb himself. LSD, which was not yet illegal to use, was being tested extensively by the CIA as a potential truth serum, and it was considered the likeliest candidate for successful results across various MK Ultra experiments. Experimenters hoped that in the end, administering the drug would bring out deep confessions, wipe the subject's mind clear, and reprogram him or her as a robot agent. Among the experimental regimen's most famous subjects was Whitey Bulger, the notorious organized crime boss. In his memoirs, he recalled residing with a group of 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state. Side effects included a total loss of appetite. The room could change shape, hours of paranoia and feeling violent. living nightmares, blood coming out of the walls. The use of LSD had seemingly innocuous origins. Albert Hofmann, a chemist for Sandoz Pharmaceutical, synthesized the drug for the first time in Basel, Switzerland, during World War II. He was searching for a blood stimulant and a substance to aid in pain management of childbirth. LSD's effects were unknown until Hofmann accidentally took it in through his fingers and discovered that a mere 25 micrograms could produce vivid hallucinations. Hofmann subsequently tested it on himself, often with adverse results. But throughout the 1950s, psychedelic clinics sprang up throughout Europe and the US. More than 40,000 people had regular prescriptions for addiction, schizophrenia, and PTSD, and LSD was thought to be a cure for homosexuality as well. The US government first became aware of LSD at the trial of Hungarian Cardinal Mindszenty, an opponent of the communist regime there. He was observed to be absent-minded, showed robotic movements, and confessed to crimes he had not committed. In response, $25 million was given to the CIA's Office of Technical Service to study human response to drugs and environmental conditions that could manipulate individuals to perform behaviors against their will. While the drug was being further popularized by psychologist Timothy Leary and poet Allen Ginsberg, the military viewed LSD as a potential chemical weapon capable of rendering whole groups of people, including military forces, indifferent to their surroundings, interfere with planning and judgment, creating apprehension, uncontrollable confusion, and terror. Naturally, the man behind the LSD experiments for the CIA was the chemist who served as MK Ultra's head. Gottlieb was born in 1918 in New York City, the son of Hungarian Jewish immigrants, and he was eager to serve the war effort, but he could not do so due to a club foot and a severe stammer. He was recruited instead for secret U.S. research in chemical warfare. Gottlieb's parents were Orthodox Jews, but Gottlieb took an interest in agnosticism and Zen Buddhism in his youth. He graduated magna cum laude in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin, followed by a doctorate from California Institute of Technology. By the time he became the leader of MK Ultra, Gottlieb believed that the agency could harness LSD's mind-altering properties for brainwashing and psychological torture in both foreign and domestic enemies. It was Gottlieb who brought the widespread use of LSD to America, and by the middle of the decade, he had attempted to arrange for the CIA to purchase the entire global supply of the drug. With that, the CIA set up a network of phony philanthropic foundations to fund university and college research. America's top education institutions were involved, including Harvard and Yale, the Research Center of Stanford University, and the Medical Institute at UCLA. Among schools participating, a few were Canadian. Private psychiatrists experimented on patients at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal and also at McGill University. In one case, a group of survivors, including the wife of a member of the Canadian Parliament, sued the US government, and the case dragged on for 4 years. As one writer put it, the CIA had developed a reign of literally bad science, driven by comprehensible, if inexcusable, human impulses. Nevertheless, the belief persisted that the collateral damage was worth it to gain the key to global power. During the nearly 10 years in which the program fully operated, no one knew or wanted to know what they were doing. The breadth of the experimentation was limited only by the overseer's whims, and oversight was virtually non-existent. Early on, Gottlieb hired George Hunter White to administer and record results for a number of experiments. White was a journalist turned narc who was reportedly into the action as a thrill. A former captain in the army, he was also an officer in the Office of Strategic Services, the World War II intelligence agency that subsequently became the CIA. As such, it only made sense for him to moonlight as a CIA operative. White once headed a drug bust that arrested 30 members of a dangerous drug gang, the Hip Sing Tong, after a 2-year undercover operation. White also worked in Mexico, China, and the Middle East, in addition to the US, after being trained in a spy saboteur school. He was an ideal candidate for Gottlieb, brash and aggressive, and unconcerned about norms and rules. Indeed, he reportedly caught Gottlieb's attention due to his sociopathic nature. In terms of the degree of restraint to be used in the experimentation process, it soon became clear that White had virtually none. In the early stages of MKUltra, White lived in New York City under the alias of Morgan Hall. There he stalked, captured, drugged, and interrogated numerous subjects before reporting results to Gottlieb. His escapades in New York only came to an end after Olson's controversial death. Under the categorization of sub-project number 42, Gottlieb desired to restart White's experiments, but he was too well known in the East. After transferring him into the CIA, White was moved to California, and by this time, sex as an interrogation method had been added to the experiment list. A series of safe houses was turned into swanky apartments decorated with X-rated art and bugged with recording devices disguised as outlets for scientists operating behind two-way glass. For the scientists, it was the chance to watch real-life porn. According to later testimony, the safe houses turned into frat houses for spies, featuring 8 martini lunches. The houses were referred to as the pad. White personally hired and evaluated each of the sex workers. Remuneration for prostitutes was paid partly in chits, exchangeable for goods and services, and for protection from law enforcement, a type of get-out-of-jail card, freeing them from legal harassment. In early experiments, a prostitute would enter one of the safe houses with a customer and offer him a drink that had been spiked with White's choice of drug for that day. At first, prostitutes were instructed to make conversation with the men, but in terms of obtaining information, that approach was deemed a massive failure, mostly because the men were more focused on their immediate hormonal needs. After sex, the prostitute would ask the customer questions to see if anything would spill. White watched them through a two-way window, martini in hand. Ultimately, a mix of LSD and sex didn't work, so White tweaked the process. The prostitutes were instructed to spend time with each man and be as affectionate as possible before leaving. This had more of a desired effect, and after sex, the men were found to be more emotionally vulnerable. The CIA paid prostitutes $100 per customer. Most of these experiments took place in San Francisco and in New York City. They had little oversight, and along with White, agents admitted that on a daily basis, their work was done in a freewheeling, party-like atmosphere. White never fully revealed himself as the head of the experiments, and in subsequent investigations he demurred, claiming that he served as a very minor missionary, actually a heretic. I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. In a retrospective, Time magazine quoted a CIA staff member as asserting that the agency appeared to be experiencing its own form of madness. Regardless of the competing claims, it's clear the CIA's aim was to ascertain whether sex could be used as a type of diplomatic currency through encouraging men to speak without feeling guarded. Operatives acted as drug suppliers in the project, with resources taken directly from their own publicized drug busts. In a breakdown of professionalism, the sex experiments spilled out of the safe houses, and White began to take his work home with him. Various friends and acquaintances were invited to dinner at his residence, with his wife present. They were served unknown drugs with their meals, and those who proved uncooperative ended up in mental hospitals with bad LSD trips. Not entirely fulfilled, White spent his free time on the town, drugging anonymous people surreptitiously. At some point, others who were keeping records at the CIA realized that he was spending an enormous amount of money, and White was eventually forced to shut down the program. Needless to say, paying prostitutes with taxpayer money was not a good look. White began to suffer from a series of depressive episodes, most likely from his habitual rampant alcoholism. He had tried every drug available in his own agency, and despite claiming to feel no effect from LSD, his sense of reality eroded. After 12 years of forced drugging and sex experiments, he added virtually nothing of value to national security. All in all, White worked with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics for 31 years. At his death, his wife left his papers to a local community college in the San Francisco area, making an investigation easy. When researchers and the government investigators finally appeared, what they found was described as being like Christmas. Gottlieb wrote a memo in 1958 listing all the ways in which a myriad of promising drugs could be used. This extended the possibilities well past interrogation into disinformation, the induction of temporary insanity, and public humiliation of political opponents. Various drugs were used to undermine enemies from Cuba to the Congo, and the program spread to the 149 mind control projects under the general program of MK Ultra. In at least 25 incidents, LSD was administered in breach of the standards under which Nazi doctors were convicted and executed in the Nuremberg trials. In the beginning, everyone on staff took LSD before Gottlieb turned to prisoners, mental patients, and prostitutes. Major General William Creasy saw even more potential. Without flinching, he wholeheartedly recommended putting LSD in a city's water supply as preferable to bombing. He thought it absurd that his idea of testing a cloud of acid over a large city was rejected. Gottlieb had been the first person ever drafted into the CIA for the purpose of controlling the human mind, and since the CIA had no hospitals of its own, his division of the agency either procured special facilities within public hospitals or single-handedly funded the construction of new wings. The entire bill to the CIA for purchasing LSD came to $240,000, and even as its results faltered, Gottlieb's belief that the agency could establish an international advantage through the use of a full range of drugs and their potential for altering or destroying the mind held fast. It has been claimed that Gottlieb never rejected any drug with the potential to carry out his work, but that he was particularly obsessive about LSD. He habitually administered increasing doses to his subjects for hundreds of days consecutively to find the point at which the human mind would dissolve. To this end, Gottlieb passed along great quantities of funding to doctors, such as Harris Isbell at the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky. A pharmacologist and director of research at the center, his subjects were described as volunteers. They were required to be physically healthy, not psychotic, and to have a background in drug addiction. In the psychiatric experiments, LSD was administered for 77 days consecutively to a group of Negro males. After all the efforts and extensive tests conducted in every way imaginable, Gottlieb concluded that LSD was too unpredictable for use in counterintelligence. Other experimenters continued to try, but Gottlieb moved his focus onto opioids and other substances. Along the way, Gottlieb fashioned a poisoned handkerchief for an Iraqi, a poisoned dart for a Congolese, and arsenal of poisoned presents intended for Fidel Castro. Gottlieb, with his doctorate in chemistry and the firm backing of the CIA, was untouchable, and peripheral associates either did not know or had no wish to know what he was doing. He served the CIA for 22 years as an expert in poisons, and his assembled staff was considered to represent the largest and most advanced thought police in the world. Aside from LSD, peripheral experiments included studies of the effects of opioids on human systems. The regimen included regular administering of morphine, methadone, and barbiturates, and tests were made with chronic barbiturate administration. When the drugs were withdrawn, resulting side effects included weakness, tremors, anxiety, vomiting, convulsions, delirium, and hallucinations. As LSD studies waned, psilocybin, psilocin, DMT, bufotenine, morning glory seeds, and mescaline received increased focus. Gottlieb's protege, Dr. John Gittinger, developed an astonishing complex of personality and psychological tests that proved to be accurate in determining the best approach to manipulating and compromising individuals. He applied such tests to more than 30,000 individuals. Gittinger worked closely with Dr. Harris Isbell and the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, where Isbell had a ready supply of candidates for testing. His work, according to the Alliance for Human Research Protection, can be described as torture on a par with Nazi human experiments. Over his experimental career, Isbell personally conducted human tests with 800 psychoactive chemicals, and hundreds of people who suffered uncontrollable urges, especially sexual assault and or murder, were sent to Gittinger. The agency had women ready, called them a stable adept at seduction, all manner of sexual activities and murder for national security. In nearby Indianapolis, Eli Lilly and Company participated in sub-project number 6, which lasted from the initiation of MK Ultra all the way into 1973. Its aim was to develop a reliable resource of LSD within the United States and assist in the search for natural hypnotic products. Other kinds of experiments. Between 1957 and 1964, Dr. Ewan Cameron was one of the preeminent names attached to MK Ultra. A psychiatrist from Bridge of Allan, Scotland, he worked his way up at the University of Glasgow before coming to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. Following his stint with the hospital and university, he became the lead psychiatrist at Albany Hospital. Cameron became an American citizen during World War II, but he spent 21 years working at McGill University in Canada. During his life, he was respected and adored, beloved for the softness of his personality. It was only later that his true activities were uncovered. This brainwashing genius has been described as an exceptionally powerful, willful, rational, and malevolent human agent. Cameron's brainwashing work was done in plain sight, and he apparently began with an earnest and desperate attempt to cure schizophrenia, and was likely well-intentioned. His practices did not become barbaric until the CIA began funding him in 1957. Subjects, including many children, suffered for more than a decade from what Cameron called being depatterned. They were dosed with LSD-25, barbiturates, PCP, and sodium amytal. They were forcibly confined in small chambers called sleep rooms, sensorially deprived and rendered incontinent. They were in most cases stripped of some or of all their memories and left unable to live outside of an institution. The funding from the CIA was the final temptation, the extreme limit for a scientist who now had a chance to pursue... The psyche was not for Cameron an entity to be psychoanalyzed. Rather, it was not an entity at all, but a series of complexly interacting patterned mechanisms and feedback functions a skilled researcher could disassemble. Cameron headed up sub-project number 68, a CIA regimen of mind control experiments in both the US and Canada, and he commuted between the two countries each week. His Canadian lab was the McGill University Allen Memorial Institute, and his program was informally referred to as the Montreal Experiments. For Cameron's US facility, MK Ultra funded construction of the Gorman Annex at Georgetown University for $1.25 million. Part of the space was set aside for the CIA and its staff of biochemists, all undercover. Few knew what the Gorman Annex's function was at all. During the 7-year period, Cameron conducted blatantly unethical and inhumane experiments there, as he had at the Bandon mental hospitals during the 1930s. He is now infamous for overutilizing coma therapies. As a regular regimen, he put patients into a comatose state for up to 5 hours each day, often for 50 or more consecutive days. Cameron described his process in 2 phases. First, it was necessary to reduce a subject to a vegetative state through electroconvulsive shock, drug-induced sleep, and sensory isolation, until the ability to function mentally or physically was lost. At that point, psychic driving was begun. This involved hundreds of hours of loop tapes through earphones, special helmets, or large speakers, especially in the later years. His program produced doctors skilled in the right procedures for removing a subject's memories. Among the most successful cases was a woman who could retrieve no memories from her birth to the time of her treatment. Not only did she not know her husband, but had no idea what one was. Cameron's experiments generally left patients in a childlike mental state. So successful were his experiments that his procedures were employed again at Guantanamo. A schedule of drugs forced on subjects led to a state of illogical thinking and impulsiveness, to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public. The most successful mode of ingestion came in the form of a knockout pill that could be surreptitiously administered in drinks, food, through cigarettes, or as an aerosol. The mix of drugs and hypnosis resulted in many patients forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking that their interrogators were their parents. Cameron's obituary was generous, with effusive fondness and the trumpeting of his credentials. It was reported that he was concerned with the well-being of men everywhere. Female patients fell in love with him by the droves and with the loveliness of his personality. In the 30 years since, that reputation has been dashed, and he is now more commonly described as maniacal, notoriously cold, and that monster. In 1961, an extensive study was undertaken of the effects of radiation on children and ignorant civilians. The study involved Harvard Medical School, the Massachusetts General Hospital, and the Boston University School of Medicine. The institutions administered radioactive iodine to a large group of disabled children at the Wrentham State School. At the Fernald School, members of the MIT staff gave radioactive materials to mentally handicapped students by adding it to their food. Saul Krugman and his staff of the New York University Medical School injected severely disabled children with the hepatitis virus at Willowbrook State School, funded by both Army Research and Development Command. A CIA memo was revealed years later by the Church Committee that listed 3 covert techniques to conduct attacks with poison on crops. Added to that was the description of a bioweapon that can fire poison, frozen into a needle shape, which can cause a heart attack or cancer in the target. Minor forms of mind control took place from the early 60s. Subliminal advertising was discovered, with brief shots of products inserted into alternate information and piped-in music at stores. Project Monarch evolved out of MK Ultra sub-projects such as Spellbinder to create robotic assassins. It was Spellbinder that brought the first 10,000 German and Japanese scientists to the US. Monarch operated on 6 levels: Alpha, to improve memory retention; Sexual Programming, to eliminate moral values and remove inhibitions; Deadly Force Programming, for special agents and military elites; Theta, Psychic Programming, through various mind control systems, brain implants, and telemetry devices; Omega, Code Green, a self-destruct program to commit suicide if the agent believes he is being forced to give up too much information; and Gamma, a situation in which the agent's senses are triggered by an opportunity for misinformation and deception. The CIA also funded a secret mind control facility in Vacaville, California, and Dr. Carl Pribram of the Neuropsychology Research Laboratory led the lab. He was quoted as saying, "I could educate a child by putting an electrode in the lateral hypothalamus and then selecting the situation at which I stimulate it." As this suggests, the CIA and the military conducted at least 100 behavior modification experiments involving children over the decades. The question of what to do with the subjects after the testing persisted. At first, killing them was discussed, but the agency doubted that they could keep it secret for long. In the end, all child subjects received a frontal lobotomy when no longer useful. A Yale University professor named Dr. Jose Manuel Rodriguez Delgado ran a long series of experiments as an expert in electrode insertion with a mix of drugs directly injected into the brain. As professor of psychiatry, he invented his own devices and experimented on animals as well. In one impressive demonstration, he inserted an electrode into the brain of a bull. If one button was pushed, he charged, but when the other button was pushed, he immediately halted. Delgado transferred this ability to change brain commands instantly to humans. A video still exists of a 16-year-old girl in which he violently changed her emotional responses with the same push of a button. He easily induced rage or calm, confusing her verbal and mental capacities until she was even uncertain about her gender. A secondary aim of the government, one shared by Delgado, was the development of a method for citizen control. He worked on the creation of a psycho-civilized society by use of a device called a stymosiever. Decades before the proliferation of sophisticated computers, Delgado predicted that soon a computer would be able to establish two-way contact with a human brain. Using transistor and electrical technology for human beings was considered a Frankenstein-like approach, and many misunderstood his early work. The stymosiever was tested on 25 subjects with chronic refractory epilepsy and schizophrenia, with small wires being inserted directly into the skull. Electrical stimulation was applied into the direct portion of the brain as chosen by the experimenter. Delgado was reportedly successful at evoking the emotion of choice and at will, but the title of his most important book, Physical Control of the Mind Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society, suggested to many that he argued against the concept of free will, impairing his image considerably. Medical drugs eventually made Delgado's approach obsolete, so he turned to other modes of controlling the brain. From time to time, he was still asked to use implants for uncontrollable prisoners. John C. Lilly, a physician, therapist, analyst, philosopher, and writer, received requests from the CIA to provide information on the use of electrodes to, quote, directly stimulate the pleasure and pain centers of the brain. Unlike Delgado, he claims to have refused, but evidence suggests otherwise. The chair of UCLA's Department of Psychiatry, Dr. Jolyon West, was an expert on cults and coercive persuasion, alcoholism, drug abuse, violence, and terrorism. At a lab in the mountains outside of UCLA, he directed a lab where he initiated the Violence Project, sponsored by the university. There, West worked with radio waves and parapsychology to create dissociative personalities, referring to his subjects as changelings. The results of experiments were the creation of amnesia, false memories, altered persona, and pseudo-identities. West served as director of the Conservative American Family Foundation and of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. At the center near Westwood, he experimented with how to control overt expression of life-threatening behavior by identifiable individuals and groups. West employed 2 Los Angeles junior high schools as source material, searching for genetic factors that predispose one to violence. One was, quote, predominantly in a black area, and the other predominantly in a Chicano area. For the first time in American history, criteria were set up for the labeling of individuals believed to be potentially criminal, even though they had committed no crime. These included minority groups and children. Dr. Philip J. Hiltz claims to have witnessed some of West's experiments on children, including one execution which caused him to forever reject the death penalty. West reached the conclusion that the physical and sexual abuse of children turned them into compliant adults. The U.S. Army and government hid a great number of similar abuse cases against children. West's experiments paralleled perfectly with the creation of multiple personalities. Dr. George Estabrooks, a supposed hypnotism expert, based his experimental practices on the fracturing of the human personality into separate aspects. Estabrooks claimed, "This is no science fiction. I have done it." He concluded that children were far easier to hypnotize and that they dissociate traumatic experiences more easily than adults, creating alternate identities that can later be exploited and controlled. Today, Estabrooks is known for being the first doctor from the MK Ultra program to publicly acknowledge the attempt to create Manchurian candidates. Estabrooks has been called the granddaddy of hypnosis in warfare and the father of the Manchurian candidate. He claimed that hypnotic control over an enemy was a simple matter if multiple personalities could be created. His now infamous quote on the need to work without supervision or oversight was telling. Quote, "Because of the demands of war, the hand of the military must not be tied by any silly prejudices in the minds of the general public. War is the end of all law." Estabrooks' work made for an important prop to Gottlieb's experiments, with the solution for spies being tortured for information. He created the concept of the hypnotic courier, in which intelligence officers went about their business with locked information in their brains, retrievable only by Estabrooks or his colleagues. Try as they might, an enemy could not pry the information loose from an unwitting soldier. Its use was deemed suitable for perilous hypothetical missions to Japan or the Soviet Union. The CIA regularly consulted with Dr. Harold Wolff, professor of medicine at Cornell University, on advances made with, quote, "threats, coercion, imprisonment, deprivation, humiliation, brainwashing, black psychiatry, and hypnosis, with or without chemical agents." Wolff was the director of the CIA cutout. In espionage terms, a cutout is a mutually trusted and creditable intermediary or channel to facilitate the exchange of information between intelligence personnel or those involved in espionage. Wolff was also the director of the Human Ecology Foundation, a front for MK Ultra, and director of the American Neurological Association. In 1961, the Human Ecology Foundation was moved from New York City to Cornell University. Experiments were widened to include sexual pleasure and pain. Psychiatrist Raymond Prince, a former British-Nigerian colonist, traveled to Nigeria with human ecology funding to undertake, quote, "transcultural psychological studies." He later believed that the funding was offered so that he could bring foreign nationals into the CIA. His further assignment was to collect psychocultural data on cultures and countries of interest to the CIA for psychological warfare purposes. Among the leading experts on hypnosis was Dr. Martin Orne, who, along with Jolyon West of UCLA, famously killed an elephant with LSD at the Oklahoma City Zoo. He performed one experiment in Australia called Antisocial Behavior and Hypnosis. Listed under subproject number 84, the experiment was repeated at Harvard to study the induction of high motivation in individuals by means of, quote, "specific interpersonal relationships." The general aim was to test the limits of hypnosis and to improve agent assessment of techniques. Electromagnetic manipulation studies continued at UCLA at the Brain Research Center, where Dr. Mary Brazier and Dr. Ross Adey led the experiments. They realized that the brain irradiates extremely low frequencies that can be manipulated electromagnetically. The study's purpose was to publish books on advanced technologies related to brain function. Brainwashing became a fixture in American life, partly due to fears of demonized enemies by the press. The practice was a nation's concern, a creeping worry all could viscerally understand. To be a brainwashing expert was thought to be a noble calling, but in Naomi Klein's bestseller, The Shock Doctrine, Ewan Cameron was exposed as Dr. Shock. Robert Hunter, a journalist, advanced the popular use of the term brainwashing. A propagandist as well, he called it the calculated destruction of men's minds, a veritable Manhattan Project of the mind. Subproject number 119's goals paralleled the studies of electromagnetism that sought techniques of activation of the human organism by, quote, remote electronic means. It was funded by the Defense Intelligence Agency under the operation name of Sleeping Beauty. Non-lethal radio energy frequencies produced neurological effects in chimpanzees and overlapped with human experiments. Meanwhile, at Harvard, Dr. William Sweet participated in brain electrode and implant experiments, including the injection of uranium into patients. There were reportedly 149 external sub-projects, categorized under the wholesome term of human ecology. But the Smithsonian claims there were 162. The discrepancy is a clear byproduct of the CIA secrecy and the negative aspects of an agency policing itself. The end. As the wrong people began to catch wind of CIA activities, particularly in terms of Manchurian candidates, the CIA made the interesting move of refocusing the press attention to the subject. This was done to prevent the public from focusing on the torture and interrogation research being done and on the burgeoning use of LSD. Gottlieb still had the idea of giving control drugs to high officials to affect the course of important meetings. Everyone in the Office of Technical Service had tried the drug, with 2 people in each room taking notes on the other. But the agency eventually gave up on LSD after reaching the same conclusion that Gottlieb had forsaken the secret that was going to unlock the universe. Barbiturates became the next big thing for the agency, followed by amphetamines. When under their influence, subjects began to babble, mostly incoherently. With sodium pentothal and ergon, a brief window was discovered where questions could be asked with a credible answer forthcoming. Child developmental studies were intended to reach a childlike regressive state induced by torture. They were more sweetly termed coercive interrogation, then enhanced interrogation. Such studies were usually racially and economically profiled. The studies of Dr. Beatrice Burl on the impact of disease on families in Harlem are still not understood. Chinese individuals were studied as a different personality type, as was the family structure of the Soviet Union, and in examples of cross-cultural communication. MK-Ultra was renamed MK-Search in 1964, and Gottlieb retired from the CIA in the early 70s, but was brought before Congress in 1974. There he was able to broker a deal to save himself from prosecution. Among the most complete accounts of Gottlieb's career was Stephen Kinzer's Poisoner-in-Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control. Clearly, MK-Ultra was an umbrella term for a myriad of separate experimental studies, despite all being funded by the CIA. When it was officially closed, it took on new incarnations under different names well into the 1970s. The successor to MK-Ultra was MK Naomi, specializing in biological warfare items and practices, including wartime agents that could kill or incapacitate a subject at a moderate distance. In the early 70s, David H. Price, author of Buying a Piece of Anthropology, observed that society could benefit from a study of the intelligence community interfaced with academia to get what they wanted, since the CIA had used virtually all the top educational institutions as a front. Taking heed of Price's suggestion, John Marks, a U.S. State Department Foreign Service employee, used the Freedom of Information Act to secure release of thousands of documents. A document from 10 years prior stressed, quote, the interdisciplinary scope of the project. It became apparent that some academics knew and others did not. It also revealed that reports to the agency from the various sub-projects came in 2 versions, one for the general academic community and a secret one for the CIA archives. All in all, about 150 projects associated under the umbrella of MK-Ultra tested all kinds of drugs and techniques on humans, including psychedelic drugs, paralytics, and electroshock devices, some with the subject's knowledge and some without. The various agencies kept notoriously poor records. Outgoing CIA Director Richard Helms attempted to cover any trace of MK by destroying all the records and documents when the program was officially halted shortly before the Church Committee began investigating some of the experiments in 1974. The programs were too widespread and independent, however, and documents came to light at various times over the next 3 decades. Senator Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho, headed a Senate committee in 1974 to investigate the CIA. Around the same time, New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh published a story claiming that the CIA conducted non-consensual drug experiments and illegal spying operations on American citizens. The article began the lengthy process of bringing the truth to light, and the public was not truly aware of the program until 1975. The subcommittee led a wider congressional investigation into a broader range of illegal CIA activities in the U.S. and around the world. In 1976, President Gerald Ford set up a U.S. Presidential Commission to investigate the agency, while the Church Committee widened the investigation to include the FBI and other intelligence agencies. Plots to assassinate foreign leaders were uncovered, along with thousands of documents related to MK once thought destroyed by the agency. The result was an executive order in 1976 prohibiting, quote, experimentation with drugs on human subjects, except with informed consent, in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each such human subject. Along with documents that were saved because of incorrect storage were additional MK materials. One document from the early program stated that hypnosis experiments were, quote, neither of sufficient complexity to warrant extravagant claims for operation use. There were, however, strong indications of potential hypnosis as an offensive and defensive aid. Automatic self-injections were also found, and a supply of rhodixin in 100 milligram doses used to treat hypertension and psychotic states. Thorazine hydrochloride, a common tranquilizer, was present, as was a mild analgesic containing small amounts of dexamphetamine, barbiturate, acetyl salicylic acid, and phenacetin. Anti-Parkinson drugs included hyoscine, artane, theforin, panpirit, bella bulgara, Rebalon, and Vinabel. Among the muscle relaxants were tolserol, Benadryl, Dexedrine, a few antihistamines, and 2 unidentified drugs listed as compound 08958 and MK02. James Angleton, Chief of Counterintelligence for the CIA from 1954 to 1974 and a master spy hunter during the Cold War, was revealed to have hatched a plan to make a Manchurian candidate kill Fidel Castro. The prototype was to be an individual approximately 35 years old, well educated socially and politically, to perform an act involuntarily of attempted assassination against a prominent politician or, if necessary, against an American official. Following the assassination, the assassin was to be taken into custody and thereby disposed of. On July the 20th, 1977, CIA Director Stanfield Turner testified on the ABC Evening News that about 25 years earlier, the CIA secretly contracted with an unidentified professor of neurology. This professor went to an unnamed prison to experiment on an unknown number of convicts. He was to test an amnesia drug that could induce loss of willpower and memory, after learning that the Russians had tested it on 2 Russian agents. Both agents were drugged and hypnotized, and they relived past incidents in their lives, followed by successful interrogations. Johns Hopkins University and its involvement in drug experiments was exposed by famous investigative columnist Jack Anderson. Anderson claimed that one plaintiff was used as a chemical mixing bowl, even though the CIA knew he was already mentally unstable. He attempted suicide by burning, hanging, and trying to gnaw off his arm after suffering permanent brain damage. Uncertainty surrounds George Peters, the Church of Naturalism's founder, who was murdered at his Hollywood Hills compound. Since November 1982, he had worked on a film exposing CIA experiments and had gathered extensive notes. He knew that the CIA was testing drugs on American citizens without their knowledge, and that research was being conducted on the surreptitious administration of drugs. He was also aware of a knockout or K drug and other tests on advanced cancer patients. New material was released after 18 cartons of materials were discovered in 2002. More details were provided on Rewolfia, Megatron, Mitrazole, prefrontal lobotomies, and the study of ESP. Psychiatric research in Czechoslovakia was uncovered on benzodrine, caffeine, scopolamine, alcohol, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC acetate, cannabis, and indicia, all under hypnosis. About 4,000 new documents were discovered in 2016. A Black Vault user named Oscar Diggs discovered irregularities in the disclosed CIA collection. Diggs enumerated a list of missing records, but the CIA refused to fill them, claiming behavioral modification documents are not the same as mind control. Black Vault is now crowdfunding to cover fees imposed by the CIA for the remaining 4,385 pages. Abandoned military constraints on cruelty and torture dating back to the Lincoln administration in 1863 were, in the MK Ultra age, circumvented and discarded. The Yale Law Journal describes brainwashing and other manipulative forms as a dispersed and different kind of enemy with no flag or uniform. Old CIA manuals reveal that admissions of complicity are not ends in themselves, but merely preludes to the acquisition of more information. Among the starker claims came from Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, who insisted that he was microchipped by the federal government. His claim is as yet unconfirmed, but subliminal frequency manipulation still exists. Remote neural monitoring, RNM, is still of particular interest in the modern age, a way to send coded signals to the brain from a distance. Two-way RNM communication is also a present field of study. Dr. Eldon Bird, a CIA scientist, worked for the Naval Surface Weapons Office on various methods of riot control, clandestine operations, hostage removal with electromagnetic devices long after MK Ultra was closed. It is believed to have been replaced with Operation Pandora, studying the effects of low-intensity microwave signals in relation to the so-called Moscow signal. Holdovers from the MK Ultra years include MK Chickwit, a program to identify new advances in Asian and European drug experimentation. Project Satan resided 18 floors beneath the Plattsburgh Air Force Base in northeast New York. Its closure date is unclear, but the strange program conducted trauma-based experiments using perceived satanic colors, use of the occult, and common satanic symbols. Racist ideologies were drummed into child subjects there for an unknown reason. Once closed in its early incarnations, MK Ultra took on new identities under a host of new names well into the 1970s. The successor to MK Ultra was MK Naomi, specializing in biological warfare items and practices, including wartime agents that could kill or incapacitate a subject at a moderate distance. No evidence points to the U.S. currently experimenting with neurotechnology for national security purposes, but the military remains committed to advancing the field and is still the primary funder of various scientific research and experimentation funding, most notably engineering and computer science. The Army receives $55 million per year, while the Navy receives $34 million and the Air Force $24 million to pursue neuroscientific research. Of course, conspiracy theorists continue to claim that MK Ultra was never truly discontinued. After its official termination date in 1973, Operation Mockingbird emerged. A theory is held by some that CIA employees were smuggled into editorial offices and television studios of major media houses to influence public opinion. One of the darkest chapters suspected of the operation speaks of prostitution rings for minors living under mind control, serving as sex slaves for powerful elites. What is clear is that the normally benevolent roles of Western medical practitioners were upended, and under the auspices of MK Ultra, they were dominated by a disregard for the individual human subject. This was true in both the United States and Canada, where mental health professionals reached high positions with grisly or apathetic views of the human as an object of study. Among them was Canadian psychiatrist Dr. George Brock Chisholm, who claimed that only societally ingrained moral codes controlled human behavior, and that the psychiatric world should work to break them down. According to Chisholm, the reinterpretation and the eventual eradication of the concept of right and wrong are the belated objectives of nearly all psychotherapy. Ever a controversial speaker, Chisholm announced that in order to achieve one world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to their traditions, and national identifications. Chisholm embraced the belief that instilling concepts of right and wrong, love of country, and morality in children by their parents is the paramount evil. Through all of this, Chisholm led a highly decorated career, serving as the Director General of the World Health Organization and the 13th Canadian Surgeon General. He was the recipient of the Order of Canada, Order of the British Empire, and the Military Cross. Between his retirement and his death at the age of 80 in 1999, Gottlieb finished a graduate degree in speech therapy from San Jose State University. For 18 months, he led a large leper colony in India before purchasing a log cabin in Virginia and establishing a commune. There he enjoyed his favorite hobbies, folk dancing and raising goats. Gottlieb's life story is one of the few aspects of the project known for sure, because tracking MK Ultra's many name changes and supposed expiration dates continues to be difficult. The Freedom of Information Act is beneficial for research of former eras, but in many cases, the lack of CIA records and transparency has defeated the purpose of the legislation. And to trace funding, investigators must often deal with numerous coded and anonymous sources, some fictitious. Given what has been discovered of MK Ultra thus far, the entire scope of the operations may never be fully known. You've been listening to Project MK Ultra, the history of the CIA's controversial human experimentation program by Charles River Editors, narrated by Colin
Shut up,
Fluxman.
faggot!
Copyright